Hello dear viewers, it's George from Ireland. You're not seeing my ugly mug for a change because I forgot my selfie stick. But anyway, here I am in the city of Bury St Edmunds in the United Kingdom. So quite a small city. And why does it have that name? Well, St Edmund was indeed buried here. But I mean, there's also the Anglo-Saxon word bur or borough, as in town. So you're seeing a bit of the Abbey Church, parts of which date back to roughly 1065. Bury St Edmund, he was killed here well over 100 years before that. This is largely a Norman style, Norman tower, so it was rebuilt extensively in the late 11th century. There was an abbey here for centuries, and then in 1539 Henry VIII closed it down as part of the dissolution of the monasteries. He closed most religious houses because obviously he'd broken from Rome. 1533 is the year I would give from the break with Rome. Other people would say it's anything from 1529 onwards. It's debatable when he really broke from Rome. What would that be? When he outlawed prima nure, when he ordered the active submission of the clergy, or things like that. So anyway, it's a very handsome small city, and considering it's late October, it's incredibly mild and sunny. So the monks were laicized, nuns were also laicized, told, you know, leave this and just leave the religious life, and you're ordinary men and women and get jobs, and yes, you were allowed to get married, and most of them accepted that. A very few of them didn't, were executed. So the Thomas Cromwell from 1536 until 1540 had conducted this dissolution of the monasteries, sending commissioners to around to investigate the monasteries, get stories about the monasteries, looking for scandal, alcoholism, licentiousness, irreligion, fraud, simony, sacrilege, heresy, blasphemy, vulgarity, anything very damning and scandalous, as a reason to close them down, closing the small religious houses first of all, and then a second way of closing even the larger religious houses, even those of good repute. But sometimes the stories that came back from the commissioners were too positive. And so he sent them back saying, no, I want some negativity. You've got to give me an excuse to close them down. What was I going to say? Well, going back to St Edmund, he was a king of the East Angles. In this part of England, it's called East Anglia. This is the original England. Well, the original England, I should say, is a peninsula in northern Germany. The Angles came over in the early 5th century AD, when there was still Roman Britain. Saxons came from what's Saxony in Germany, Lower Saxony, Saxony-Anhalt, and the Jutes from mainland Denmark, peninsular Denmark, of course, is Jutland or Jylland in the Danish language. But the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes landed on the eastern coast of England. There was no England as a word or as a concept back then, and then this became England. And in what's today England, the word England only applied to the very eastern parts of England, East Anglia and West Anglia. This is East Anglia. So there was no such thing as England in any sense until about 735, when that monk, the Venerable Bede, up at Jarrow, penned his book, An Ecclesiastical History of the English Church. So he's the one who invented the words England and English based on Angles, as the Angles had come over from what's now Germany. So then there were several different kingdoms in what's now become England. So here was East Anglia, and the Danes invaded in the 9th century AD, the late 9th century, and the Anglo-Saxons are completely merged into married back then, and the Jutes absorbed into them. There was no distinction between Anglo-Saxons and Jutes at that point, and so the Danes fought against them, and the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, they largely forgot that, of course, they'd come from the same part of the world a few hundred years earlier. About 400 years earlier. Well, 400 years, of course, is a very, very long time. So it's a bit like, say, the 1688 revolution, to some extent a Dutch invasion. But if the Netherlands were to invade the United Kingdom today, then the British wouldn't accept it on the basis that Britain had been invaded by the Netherlands before, and some of the British elite are of Dutch descent from that time. Okay, so here's some gardens. We're walking around, ambulatory prayer, contemplation, and indeed, obviously a kitchen garden. So, a place of extraordinary tranquility here. Quite a small city, very historic. And oh, is that a bowling green just here? And then you can go inside. So, lots of rich farmland around here, because it was very flat. A lot of it was marshy and the fens hard by, but drained over the centuries to make it suitable for farming, arable farming. and there are a few shepherds, but often you put sheep on marginal land where it wouldn't be so suitable for arable farming. Go in the cathedral a little bit later. So look at this wall. Well, it's not a dry stone wall, unfortunately, but it shows the sort of flinty stone which is native to this part of the British Isles. Anyway, just trying to think of famous people from Bury St Edmunds. There are some, and when English people started going to America in the early 17th century, they often set sail from here, and there's a grave nearby of a man who's the father of Martha, the one whose name was given to Martha's Vineyard. Some of the original Jamestown, Virginia settlers came from here. So look at this, AMDG. So surprising to have the initials of the Latin phrase Ad Majorem Dei Gloriam, to the greater glory of God, laid by Michael, the Lord Archbishop of Canterbury, 24th of June 1964. So the Archbishop of Canterbury being the highest priest in England, because when St Augustine of Canterbury was sent by the Pope to re-Christianise England, he landed in Kent, the county of England, or then it was a kingdom that was closest to the continent, and the King of Kent welcomed him. He embraced the Christian message and said, "You're free to go around evangelising my subjects," which he did, and gave him some land. He built a church in wood there at Canterbury. Canterbury being the county town of Kent, well obviously a city now, because it's had a cathedral since that time. And that wooden church was rebuilt in stone and expanded, and that is Canterbury Cathedral, the largest place of worship in the British Isles, even though Canterbury is actually rather small. And the Archbishop of Canterbury actually lives in Lambeth in London, Lambeth Palace, almost directly south of the river from the Houses of Parliament. But so nevertheless, curiously, by that historical phenomenon, Canterbury is the religious capital of England, just like St David's the religious capital of Wales. But St David's is very small, and Cardiff is the actual capital, and St Andrew being the religious capital of Scotland, despite Edinburgh being the historic capital of Scotland, and Armagh is the religious capital of Ireland. A tiny place has never been Dublin as the religious capital. So look here at this cottage from 1640. Well, not cottage, small house, because cottage is a one-room house in my view. Why do we not call it bungalow? Why do we use the Indian word bungalow as well? Well, this is from 1846, and that is a standard mid-19th century motif. The X design, or not X design, more like diamond pattern, black bricks on red bricks. And look at the detail. Look at the handiwork. Do you see what craftsmanship went into the leaves, the little berries, and these stylized lions' faces, almost like human faces. And look at the gargoyles spouting out water. You see on the corner there, this special stonework around the windowsill. Away up there, some is worn away by the weather over the centuries. The coat of arms by Lewis Nockels Cottingham. Died here in 1847, and he designed this Norman Tower cottage just before he died. You see things like this at Eton and in Kensington. So we've seen a lot of it, and a bit of the Abbey Gateway. It reminds me of St Albans Abbey so much. So I think when hundreds of monks were living here, a place of education, but they often provided charity like old folks' homes, orphanages, places for wayfarers to stay, especially if they're walking on pilgrimages, even discalced ones to Canterbury or even to the continent. And then when these were all shut down, it was a huge loss to the country. There was almost no schooling going on for about 10 years. So Edward VI came along in 1547, the son of Henry VIII, the godly imp, as the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, called him. King Edward VI became king at the age of 9 and founded loads and loads of schools. And if there's a King Edward school, it's almost certainly named in honour of King Edward VI. So even though he was 9, he started founding schools. You think he might have been against schools, but of course he never went to school. Being a prince, he only ever had tutors. See, oh look, 1846 in the stonework. AD 1846. But I thank you so much for watching, and I warmly recommend coming to this rather handsome, elegant, perhaps twee, and a very placid little city of Bury St Edmunds. Churchgate Street. There are quite a few US Air Force bases here, dating way back to 1942, Milden Hall and others. So thank you for watching. Goodbye.